Is there a better sight on the road than a ruby stone 964 Carrera RS? I first drove one of these for my channel around 5 years ago, and I was of the opinion that although there's absolutely no question this is a phenomenal Porsche 911, within that spectrum of Rennsports, the car probably wouldn't make my top 5, certainly not my top 3. Now, half a decade since, I've spent more time with the 964 Carrera RS, including time on track, and I am warming to the car, quite literally today, because it's 30 odd degrees outside and it feels like considerably more than that in here. I've got to keep the cold air down in order for you to hear me, so this really is commitment to the cause. Anyway, whilst it's true the 964 RS does sit a little bit closer to my heart these days, particularly when Mark at Paragon gives me the keys to his Ruby Stone example with 8,000 miles on the clock. However, as we're about to find out, the 964 Rennsport story doesn't end there. Okay, I am itching to drive the RS 3.8, as you can well imagine, but whilst we have what is an absolutely stunning and very low mileage Ruby Stone 3.6 RS here at Paragon, it's important that we can get the car side by side and have an apples with apples comparison. So let's begin with bodies. 3.6 narrow body, RS 3.8 wide body. The body is actually taken from the 964 Turbo 3.6. There's a couple of reasons for that. One of them being on the rear. The reason that the Turbo 3.6's rear bumper was used is so that the RS 3.8 can have twin exit exhausts, one for each cylinder bank, versus the 3.6's single exit exhaust system.
Likewise, there's a difference in the wings. The RS 3.6 using the active rear wing taken from the 964 Carrera, whereas the RS 3.8's lightweight fixed wing is based on the 964 Turbo Cup, though it can be manually adjusted to 6 different positions.
So here you can see the dainty, slim-hipped profile of the 964 RS 3.6 versus the RS 3.8's iconic turbo arch profile. Engines we'll discuss later on in the video because there's lots to talk about there. I want to stay with chassis. We'll start at the front. As I mentioned, the RS 3.8 is turbo bodied. On the front axle, it also carries over a lot of the 964 Turbo 3.6's spec, including the brakes, 322mm drilled and vented discs on the front, 299mm on the back. It's got the turbo suspension. They are Bilstein dampers. They are stiffened though, of course, for the RS 3.8. The rear is arguably a lot more interesting.
That's because it's not the turbo setup. Instead, it's pretty much identical to the RS 3.6. That's a narrow-bodied car though, so while the suspension is in the same place, Porsche asked Speedline to build super wide 11-inch split rims. The Speedlines are 18 inches in diameter. For comparison, the 3.6's magnesium wheels are 17 inches by 9 at the rear, which is the same width as the front on the 3.8.
To the naked eye, with the RS 3.8 litres wide body, wing, turbo running gear, etc., you would think that there's a weight penalty over the RS 3.6. It's actually not the case at all. The RS 3.6 weighs 1,230 kilos. The RS 3.8 weighs 1,210. It's also got a better top speed than the RS 3.6 of around 7 miles an hour to a claimed or quoted 169 miles an hour. That is pretty much top line between those two cars. The RS 3.6, 2,400-ish models made. The RS 3.8, 55 for the road. Well, the 964 RS 3.6 essentially homologated the Carrera Cup cars. Carrera Cup, of course, would eventually become Super Cup. The RS 3.8 was needed to essentially homologate the car for international GT racing. Le Mans, the ADAC, GT Masters, that sort of thing. So Porsche only needed to build 100 of these in both RS and RSR specification. And to be honest, what's most amazing and mind-blowing even about this project that was spearheaded by Roland Kussmaul and Jürgen Barth and his team was that this job essentially kept those two Porsche legends and their team of engineers as damn near in a job, really. You have to remember that at the start of the 1990s, the Group C program had obviously been wound down. Porsche wasn't competing as a factory unit anywhere. They were supporting a few customer teams, the most notable of which was Rook Racing of the time. As I say, there wasn't too much to do until, step forward, the 964 Carrera RS 3.8. Now, my sources tell me there are 104 of these cars built across both RS, the road spec cars, and RSR, the race cars. The numbers do differ if you look at different places around the internet, but my sources, fairly reliable, tell me 104 cars in total, plus a couple of prototypes, 55 of which were road cars, the RS, 49 of which were the RSRs, the race cars. It was the RSRs that were built first, and all of them were built within a 12-month period from the middle of 1993 to 1994. Already, this is a totally different animal to the RS 3.6. For starters, I'm on the left-hand side, obviously. The Ruby Stone car was a right hooker. The right-hand drive cars, they get power steering. The left-hand drive cars don't. So it's not really a fair comparison between the two because the right-hand drive does have power steering. But what I will say is the steering on this just feels alive. It's just completely unfiltered, and the noise is a proper motorsport noise. It's hilarious looking out that rear mirror and seeing a huge biplane wing staring back at me. That's a Rennsport, isn't it, to me? The brakes as well completely feel up to the job. This car does have ABS, but with a bigger servo. The shift, by the way, is the same, as is the gearbox, although there's a different limited slip differential on this car. Like the 3.6, this also has the lightweight flywheel as well. The wheel, though, is one of the best wheels ever to be affixed in front of the 911's iconic 5 dials, the Club Sport wheel. Small in diameter, lovely chunky grip. It doesn't sound like a 964, doesn't particularly feel like a 964 either. While the narrow-bodied car, it really does remind me of a 2.7 RS. Narrow on skinny tyres, and there's quite a noticeable weight transfer. In this, just feels so planted. More grip, a much wider track width, a much stiffer car. There's thicker anti-roll bars on this as well, front and back over the 3.6. Just behaves in a really different way. I think the best way to describe it is everything's moved up a notch in terms of speed. It's just a lot more capable. And in terms of the chassis and the engine, it really does show you what was just around the corner for the Rennsport story, in terms of obviously the 993 RS, which came along only 2 years after this. Let's talk about the engine, the beating heart of this car, and it really is the very best thing about it. 3.8 litres, obviously up slightly in displacement over the 3.6 of the narrow-bodied 964 RS. It's got new, lighter and shorter pistons and pins. It's got a reworked crankshaft, a new Motronic fuel and ignition system. Compression ratio is up as well to 11.6 to 1, and airflow into and out of the flat six has been vastly reworked as well, including of course the twin exhaust, one for each bank, as I mentioned earlier on. The result of all of that is 300 horsepower, up from that 260 horsepower of the 3.6, and the red line has been raised as well. Just feels like a proper motorsport engine shoehorned into a road car. Have to say, I am just amazed at the rate at which this car covers ground. A lighter overall mass and more power means that certainly from a rolling start, this thing just dusts the 3.6. It flies. It absolutely flies. really do get the impression that with the 3.6 as the homologation car for the Carrera Cup, it's the ultimate one make series, but it is a one make series after all, whereas this, due for multi-mark and multi-make international GT endurance racing, it's a step up. It's a huge step up, and the RS 3.8 as a road car to me really does reflect that. I'm trying to think if I can compare this to anything else that's gone before in the 911 sort of lineup, and it's definitely a bigger difference than the 997 RS 3.8 to 4 litre, without a doubt. Really then you have to go right the way back to the very start of the 911 Rennsport story, with that evolution from the 2.7 RS in 1973 to the 3 litre RS of 1974, which really was such a huge step on. And again, there are more synergies there. The 2.7 RS is kind of the textbook 911 collector's car, isn't it? The 3 litre RS, only 109 made, 6 in right-hand drive, by the way, and they're all different colours, they're all known by their colours. Some collectors haven't even heard of that car, and it's the same as this, the 964 RS, it's the classic RS that everybody has to have, but the 3.8 litre RS, again, largely flies under the radar. Good luck finding one, that's for sure, in the first instance, but second of all, it's going to cost you a lot of money to get your hands on this.
The RS 3.8 is simply one of the rarest and most special Porsche 911s, both in the way it drives and in terms of what it gave to the wider 911 story. The 3.8 rewrote the definition of RS for the 964 era and significantly involved the Rennsport recipe beyond its core focus of weight saving. A wide body, motorsport engine and aggressive aero are all traits of the modern 911 RS, but they can all be traced right back to the very car you see here, a car you might never have even heard of just 9 minutes ago.